Hi guys, welcome back, and today we're going to talk about some of the leaders of the civil rights movement. Remember last time we talked about the 1950s and what had going on then, the overturning of segregation with Brown v. Board of Education and the integration of schools in places like Little Rock, Arkansas, and the Little Rock crisis. So today it's mainly going to be kind of the 1960s themselves, but before we get into the acts and what has actually happened, we need to have a little short discussion on who the people are and the individual players in the civil rights movement. So today that's what we're going to focus on as the leaders of the movement. And one of those, one of the most influential ones at the time, that really at the outset, is Rosa Parks. She's a secretary for the NAACP, and the NAACP is a group that is concerned about kind of the treatment and the promoting of African American rights. And so they're going to actually begin, they're going to challenge a rule in Montgomery, Alabama of segregation on the bus. And they see her as one of the perfect people to do it. So they have her go sit on a bus, and she sits towards the front of the bus in the kind of the white only section. And when a white passenger comes on and tells her to move, she actually refuses. She says, "No, it's my right to sit here. You can't tell me where I can and can't sit." The bus driver yells at her as well and tells her to move, and eventually she is arrested. And this sets off a firestorm in Montgomery because the majority of the people who rode the bus and used public transit were African Americans. And through Rosa Parks and the NAACP, they enact a boycott, which means they're going to get African Americans to refuse to ride the bus. And it works. It goes really well. And for a while, the bus service ends up kind of having to bow to their will and give in and get rid of the ideas of segregation, because they're almost going to go bankrupt because they're struggling so mightily against this this segregation law. Now, one of the other people that's influential in this time is Malcolm X. So in 1946, he is arrested and goes to prison. While in prison, he embraces the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, and he converts to Islam and becomes part of the Nation of Islam, or what is known as kind of Black Muslims. It's an offshoot of Orthodox Islamic faith. And he began to preach about separationism and armed self-defense. So while we'll talk about Martin Luther King earlier, who wants more integration and more nonviolent protest, Malcolm X saw no way for whites and blacks to coexist other than through kind of self-defense and arming themselves and watching out for each other. And so he begins more of kind of this idea of like have black separatism, of moving off and living your own life and not worrying about maybe having this, but trying to fight for equal rights through that means. One of the other people we need to talk about is Robert Kennedy. He is the brother of John F. Kennedy. He was Attorney General through Robert Kennedy, or through JFK's administration and part of the LBJ administration, and he really begins to kind of see the civil rights of Americans as one of his most important and influential ways in Washington. And so he ends up protecting a group known as the Freedom Riders, who we will talk about a little later, and he supports desegregation once he finishes his time as Attorney General. He becomes a senator from New York, and he really fights for desegregation throughout the country. And he'll eventually run for president and tragically be killed himself by a man by the name of Sirhan Sirhan while he's running for president in 1968. Now, you also have a group known as the Black Panthers. It's a militant African-American political organization that's formed in 1966 by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. And the idea is that they were going to protect themselves in a way similar to what Malcolm X was advocating. They were going to fight police brutality and to provide services in the ghetto, and they have this kind of imposing figure, and they get kind of a bad reputation mainly amongst white community, but there's really not many instances of actual violence. It's mainly a way to kind of protect themselves through strength. And they're incredibly influential and powerful, mainly amongst black community members in the 1960s and up through the 70s. Now, we can't have a discussion about the civil rights movement without one about Martin Luther King Jr. He coordinated what was known as nonviolent resistance, meaning he didn't want people to fight back when they were oppressed or when they were beaten or attacked by those who opposed them. He's one of the first people who helps lead the Montgomery bus boycott, and he ends up winning the Nobel Peace Prize and is actually the youngest person to ever win that. And he's called a nonviolent resistance. He calls his nonviolent resistance Soul Force. He's also a minister from Atlanta, Georgia, and that's really kind of the launching point for his civil rights movement. Now, he does have some influences. One of them is this guy, Henry David Thoreau, who believed in civil disobedience, which was the refusal to obey unjust laws. Thoreau thought if you thought a law was unjust, like segregation, well, you don't have to abide by that. You can revolt and go against it because it's an unjust law. It's something that's trampling on your civil liberties. And that was something that Martin Luther King read, somebody he read and admired for his thinking. He also studied the beliefs of Mahatma Gandhi, who was a leader who helped India overthrow the British rule in the 1930s and 40s. He learned to resist oppression without violence, and Gandhi was really a big encourager of this nonviolent resistance, of not fighting back, of loving your enemies and showing them that your cause means enough to you that you will not fight back. And it really begins to like win people over to your side. You become kind of a martyr in a lot of ways. And Gandhi gained a lot of influence and a lot of power and a lot of people on his side because of his nonviolent protests, which is what Martin Luther King will do, and he'll get the same kind of treatment. He'll get a lot of sympathizers and a lot of people who join his cause, mainly because of his ability his insistence on not fighting back. Now take a moment and pause the screen and write this chart down, and it's incredibly important. And I know it's kind of an alphabet soup of things here, but it's a list of organizations that fought for equality for African Americans. There's groups like CORE, the Congressional for Racial Equality, the NAACP, the SCLC, and SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who all had major accomplishments in the 1950s, 60s, and up through the 70s. And they're important groups even to this day. The NAACP is still an incredibly influential group. So once you have those down, that's all you need. If you have any questions, make sure you put them in the notes. We will talk much more about this in class. There's a lot more to discuss about the individual players in this and how they fit into the civil rights movement. Again, this is just a very brief overview of who these people are. Martin Luther King has a long and storied past within the civil rights movement that we will get into, and we'll learn more about his writings and some of the things that he advocated. But for now, just make sure that you have these main people in there. We'll talk about many of them tomorrow. And if you have any other questions, please include those in your notes. Until then, have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.